welcome to everyone in the room, and we also have around, how many people do we have online?
I checked about 25.
And welcome to all of the people that are joining online today as well. My name is Fiona York. I'm the Executive Officer of Housing for the Aged Action Group. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as any Aboriginal people that are joining us today in person or online. And I'd also like to acknowledge that sovereignty over these lands was never ceded, and housing issues that we're talking about today disproportionately affect Aboriginal people and communities. Before we begin, I'd just like to do a little bit of housekeeping. For those who haven't been to this fantastic venue before, we have two lots of toilets. There's some down the corridor which are disability access, and then there are some off to the right-hand side which are accessible by some stairs. We'll also be recording the session online today, and if you don't want to have your photo taken, can you please let Dinny, can you pop your hand up, Dinny know, so that we can not include you in any publicity shots. I'd also like to acknowledge the incredible contribution of our volunteers in our New South Wales Lived Experience Advocacy Group and other people who join us today who have a lived experience of housing stress and homelessness. It's really important to have the voices of people who are affected by the issue influencing policy and advocacy, and I thank you all for your passion and your tireless advocacy. Next slide. Oh, I can use the clicker, awesome. Hey, check out all those logos. I'd like to also take the opportunity to thank the members of the Ageing on the Edge coordination group, who have been meeting for a number of years now regularly, and they are continuously working towards better outcomes for older people in New South Wales. Now, we do have a packed agenda to get through. Hopefully you have a hard copy of that, as well as what we have on screen. So some of
you know, I'll use the worksim and put it in that one.
I might just remind people that are on Zoom to pop themselves.
Because the phone I want more memory than what it would buy us.
Always, right?
No, yeah. I like having
So for those of you who have not been involved from the beginning, we were lucky enough to receive some funding through the Wicking Trust a number of years ago, and that's what informed the Ageing on the Edge Coalition. And we're supported by peak advocacy groups, service providers, people with lived experience, and a range of other stakeholders who are all working together to solve the housing issues of older people in New South Wales. So originally the group was convened as part of a reference group for a project that launched a report in 2017, which some of you may remember, which was called The Older I Get, the Scarier It Becomes, Older People at Risk of Homelessness in New South Wales. And at that time we had around 15 organisations or so. We've now grown to about 150 members and supporters from across New South Wales. About 4 years ago at the Uniting Office next door, we identified 3 advocacy priorities that we all agreed we would work together on. And those were to establish a home at last type service in New South Wales, to lower the priority age from 80 years, which is the current priority age in New South Wales to access public and community housing. And in addition to that, to build 5,000 public, community and affordable home units per year for 10 years, with 20% of those ring-fenced for older people. And ring-fenced means to allocated separately to be put aside for older people. Since then, we've made a lot of progress. We've worked with MPs, some of whom join us today, and a wide range of decision makers and other stakeholders to progress those recommendations. So since mid-2021, we've had over 175 meetings with decision makers and sector organisations. We've produced 10 reports and submissions that highlight the need for the implementation of our recommendations. And the supporting materials we developed include research reports based on census data, a cost-benefit analysis for the Home at Last service, and a business case report. Some of the data that we collected is on your tables in those infographics as well, which comes from the data that we released last year. And so after the main business of this meeting, we will be discussing some of those recommendations and working out how we can continue to work towards those and perhaps include some other recommendations depending on your valuable input. So there's been lots of changes since we first commenced, and there's lots of new opportunities to get some more traction on older people and housing, including a new government, the creation of some commissioner roles, including the Rental Commissioner and as well as Homes New South Wales. So we're hoping that we will continue to be able to collaborate on these issues in the coming years, and that is the purpose of today. We would like to have people take away from today not just a talk fest, but some real actions and some collaboration and cooperation going forward. So with that in mind, I would like to invite Alex Greenwich MP to the podium. Alex has been a big supporter of our advocacy efforts, and we're really thrilled to have him in person today. He is the independent member for Sydney in the New South Wales Parliament and was first elected in 2012. He's been a big supporter of Ageing on the Edge and has been vocal about the issues of older people and homelessness on many occasions, including in his last speech in Parliament in December 22, and supporting Ageing on the Edge leading up to the election and assisting us to engage with the new government. I'll just pop that on. No, I don't. Yeah, cool. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Can I also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of our land, the Gadigal people of the Eora, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Can I just say how wonderful it is to be in a room with so many friends and so many people who are passionate about solutions when it comes to housing for older people and addressing the housing affordability and homelessness crisis, which we continue to be experiencing across New South Wales in the inner city, but also in regional areas as well. I could go through all of the problems and all of the issues that all of you know and many of who have lived experience, but I think I'm just going to be extremely honest and say that successive governments have failed in this space. The fact that a modern global city has women living in cars, has healthcare being provided to rough sleepers on the street is a shameful failure. I know that there are so many service providers here who are at the front line of providing that crisis care to people in need, but we shouldn't have to be doing that. We should be able to provide supported housing for people in need. And we know that the growing cohort at risk of homelessness, experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, are older people who may not be able to access their superannuation or have already accessed it all, who face employment discrimination, who struggle to be approved for a rental application. And I'm sure you share my frustration at the narrative around the housing crisis and the need to just build, when that's not going to solve the problem for someone who's choosing between food and medication that week. It doesn't matter how high we build next to a train station. What we need to be doing is prioritising housing for the cohort where there's the greatest need. And that, in my view, is the older populations. And we know that parliamentary inquiries have recommended a specific focus on housing priority for people aged over 55. We need to be acting on that now. The crisis is just getting worse. As I spend time walking around Sydney, we're seeing rough sleeping increase. And if we're seeing rough sleeping increase, we know that other forms of homelessness are also on the increase. And we also know the solutions. We know we need to have obviously the priority age reduced to at least 55, and we know we need to have focused services to help older people to be able to access supports that they are entitled to, but in many cases miss out because they don't have the casework support that are made available to them. And we also all know that early intervention works. We know that the home at last model is an evidence-based model and it is delivering outcomes in other states. New South Wales is a wealthy state. We have the economic resources and a committed sector, many of whom are represented here today, who are really committed to reversing that trend. Obviously, mid to long term, we need to be providing more social and affordable housing and housing that is fit for purpose for older people. Nothing in the current housing strategy that we're hearing from the government really carves out a sufficient amount of social, affordable, key worker, older person's housing. And that has to be fixed, that has to be a priority. Because older people facing housing insecurity cannot wait for that increase in housing stock. If you are in your 60s and you are sleeping in your car, changes to the set to allow property to be built 60 stories next to a train station isn't really going to help you tomorrow when you need to be in safe supported care. So that has to be our priority. We have to be overturning the failure which has existed today. So I'm not, as Dinny and everyone at HAAG and people in this room know, I'm not someone who just wants to admire problems. I want to take action. And where we need action is funding, and where we need that funding is in the next budget. And in my budget submission to the New South Wales Government, which we lodged last Friday, at the heart of it is support for not only a number of homelessness services, but the housing at last model to be adopted in New South Wales as it has been implemented in Victoria and Queensland. I want to see the government's focus placed on that home at last model with support, guidance, casework and triage to help older people get into secure housing. I've met with the Treasurer about this multiple times. I've met with Minister Rose Jackson, who I know you'll hear from today as well, about this multiple times. They know that it is my absolute priority to see this model funded and delivered in the next budget. And I hope that this time next year, when we are all together, we are already talking about how that is being implemented and the impacts that that is having on reducing homelessness and in supporting particularly the older cohort who are experiencing increased homelessness. Can I thank you all for your dedication to the sector. I'm here to work with you to provide any support you need. Annie from my office is here as well and will be staying a bit longer than I can today. But please reach out with any funding needs, with any policy requests, with any concerns about legislation. I'm here to help and I'm here to make sure that the next budget actually delivers for the homelessness space with an increase in resources and those resources being targeted towards the ageing cohort who are at risk of homelessness. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you so much, Alex. Are you able to take any questions from the audience? Does anyone have we don't have a roving mic, so what I'll do is if you ask your question, I'll repeat it into the microphone so people online can hear. And online, they'll hear it. Great. And if anyone online is wanting to pop a question into the chat, Ginny will be able to see it hopefully, and we can repeat that as well. So over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Thank you. My name is Eunice. I'm a very proud member on the MECA, the Ministerial Advisory Council on Aging. Alex, thank you so much for opening this forum for discussion. I have not met you personally because I'm in Ku-ring-gai, but so nice to meet you. My question is very simple. It's very honorable for you to make your submission for more funding, but government will always come back to you, Alex, where is the pocket of money? So can you share that secret with us here?
Thank you, Eunice. I'll answer that in a couple of ways. One, it's up to the government to find the money for where the need is. It's not up to us. Obviously, we need funding streams and funding mechanisms. But in my over a decade in New South Wales Parliament, I've seen billions of dollars of funding being able to be found to build stadiums. I've seen billions of dollars in funding being able to build bridges. I've seen millions of dollars in funding going to appoint former members of Parliament as trade commissioners in other jurisdictions. The government has the ability to find funding for where the need is, and we saw that really successfully done in COVID, didn't we? When people experiencing homelessness or people rough sleeping were able to be supported in hotels with wraparound supports. We know it can be done. It's a matter of priority. Now, that said, I think we need to accept that, you know, homelessness and rough sleeping and housing insecurity is going to be with us for a while. There needs to be some dedicated funding streams for that. I think there is a really important conversation happening, and one that I support, in looking at how we can apply some sort of levy to short-term rental profits to help fund the homelessness sector and housing and wraparound housing support for people who need it. So those are the two ways I'll answer your really great question, Eunice. If it's a priority for government, they will find funding. We need to continue to make it a priority. But I think there are opportunities, particularly around the current discussion paper on short-term rentals, to actually create and provide some ongoing streams.
Thank you.
Look, Michael Fine from Macquarie Uni, but Eunice, I was on the MACA, Ministerial Advisory Council on Ageing, up until 2022. We put in a paper on homelessness amongst older women, which contributed to the Upper House inquiry and all that sort of stuff. And it's good to hear you reflecting that you've understood the issues. We need a long-term strategy, and the government's idea of supplying more housing supply is, I think, limited, but secondly, it's also a long-term strategy. Over 10 years, we might get somewhere. We need a long-term strategy. We've got a short-term one, and you've outlined one, the Home at Last. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit to that, as to how you would see that sort of plugging that short-term gap.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we know that HAAG has demonstrated that every dollar invested in specialist homelessness services for older people would deliver $2.30 in value. And it does that through early intervention, redirecting people from unstate costs, crisis support and healthcare. And it's just about having a dedicated focus on older people's housing, on being able to fast track housing applications for people, in being able to help people potentially access the NDIS or have aged care assessments, in able to, you know, have someone working with someone through the challenging time that it is when you have worked your whole life, where you've spent your whole life raising a family, where you've been in, you know, contributing actively or just being a great part of society, but you reach a point where you're at risk of homelessness, and we need a dedicated service and support for people to be able to support that cohort. And so that's what the Home at Last model does.
We've got a question from online. Great. This is a question from one of the participants online, from Andrew Koss from Mission Australia. Thank you, Andrew. He says, "Thank you, Alex, for your support and tireless work. I understand the New South Wales government is currently looking at no grounds eviction reform. What is your position on this? Mission Australia recently wrote to the Premier to call for it to be removed from all types of rental agreements. This was CC'd to relevant ministers, including Ms Jackson, who I hope will talk to this later this afternoon. Many thanks, Andrew."
Well, thank you, Andrew, for your great question, and also for the amazing work that Mission Australia does. Throughout the last state election, and indeed throughout the last Parliament, consistently said I support an end of no grounds evictions for both periodic and fixed term rental agreements. We need to make sure both are covered off in the legislation, and I will continue to work with the government to see that happen.
Any more questions? Yep, go for it.
Hi Alex, my name is Kelly Temple from the Business Disability Council in New South Wales, and also one of the co-chairs of the Building Better Homes campaign, which is a campaign for the silver level minimum accessibility standards in the National Construction Code. And we had a really great conversation maybe like a year ago or something with you about that, but I just wanted to ask a question about whether, given that especially we want older people to be able to age in place and for homes to be suitable for people as their life changes, And there's obviously a huge intersection between the people who experience disabilities and also who are older. I just wondered if you had been able to include that call on the government in your budget request.
Absolutely, I have done that consistently to the government. I mean, as we are talking about this massive increase in housing, we shouldn't be doing that without having already embraced at least the silver standard as a minimum. We shouldn't be building houses which into the future will be more expensive to retrofit and create barriers from people to be able to access them. So yes, that I have an ongoing commitment towards that.
I have another question from online. This question is from Greta Angel, and it's whether or not you support seeing housing as critical infrastructure like schools and hospitals.
Definitely, just as I see it, I think a right to housing is a fundamental human right. As I said, I feel that today New South Wales has really failed at it. I think we just need to be honest. Housing supply is one part of the puzzle. How that housing supply is delivered to include social, affordable, key worker, housing for accessible housing is a critical question. Then there are also the supports that need to be provided to someone once they are put in housing. It's not just about the bricks and mortar, and that is obviously critical infrastructure. It's about the policies and funding and funded supports in place to help particularly vulnerable people to be able to secure and maintain tenancies.
My name is Menaka Cook. I'm from the Older Women's Network, and I have a general question which is about accessibility to MyGov aged care. I don't know if you can speak about it, but the systems are so opaque that people don't know how to access it. I've currently been helping people in the culturally and linguistically diverse communities, and I can tell you that when I access it, I don't have a bloody clue. I'm just being thrown around from pillar to post and ring this one and ring that one and go online and how are people supposed to access it? Can you have a comment or two on that?
Look, I don't want to give you the answer of saying it's a federal issue, but it is a federal issue. All I apologise. Geez, I sound like a politician there. But the reality is my office and my team also are completely aware of this, and we are dealing with people all the time. And that's why a Home at Last model, the funding request which I've put in, that HAAG has been advocating for, is so important. So we actually have resources, people in place to do two things. One, help people navigate access through the aged care assessment at MyGov. And two, be able to make advocacy to the federal level to ensure that that is fixed.
One of the points actually is I heard somewhere that the system is going to be reformed to be more accessible, and some date like the middle of 2024 was mentioned. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that. My office can follow up with the federal member for Sydney or the member for Wentworth's office and find out what is happening there. I'm sure their offices would be dealing on a regular basis with these concerns. Yeah.
Any more questions from the room? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Gohar from the Council of the Ageing, New South Wales. Everything you said here today was really refreshing, and I'd like to thank you for your ongoing advocacy for the ageing people of New South Wales who we represent. My question is, you're doing all of this great advocacy. What advice do you have for us on our advocacy work as well to help make that cut through and to help make things turn from aspirations to actions in the government as you described as well?
Yeah, that's again, thank you for that question. Look, I think you need to make sure you're getting in front of Minister Jackson, who I know is going to be here later today, the Planning Minister, the Minister for Women and the Prevention of Domestic Violence, and really making sure the face of older people is provided, to providing case studies to members of Parliament, to encourage local members to provide speeches in Parliament on the experiences of older people and the housing insecurity they face. When we talk about housing in New South Wales, too often we're talking about, these people who have just finished university and want to buy their first home and providing incentives to help them buy their very first home. We need to be having the conversation about people who are not going to be buying a home ever, people who are going to be renting, people who are going to be in affordable or social housing and delivering for them, not the young urban professional who wants to be able to buy, a nice 2-bedroom apartment near a school. That is really important for them, but we're dealing with a crisis at the other end of housing accessibility, which we know results in ongoing risks to someone's health and mental health, but we know ultimately reduces their person's lifespan as well. This has to be a priority for us. We need to. I have often found amongst my colleagues, we like to pretend that this isn't a problem. It is a failure of our government and a failure of our state and every member in our parliament that an older woman is sleeping in a car tonight. That's a failure. We need to own it, we need to be honest about it, and we need to look at housing solutions to address that.
We've probably got time for maybe one more or maybe two, they're quick. I'm going to go first because you haven't spoken.
Thank you. Rita Martin from the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association. Thank you very much for your advocacy. We've worked together. I know how well you work with collectives, and thank you for that. But our members cover everything from assistants in nursing, who maybe work in aged care, maybe in precarious employment, up to area directors of nursing. But the vast majority of our members are still really struggling to find secure, safe, affordable housing. We've done 2-3 surveys of our members. The last one was a couple of months ago. We've had nurses and midwives who are still working, often older women, living in their cars, shocking mental health issues, suicidal ideations, really struggling terribly. And they miss out, I'm sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. They miss out on that missing middle that comes. They have no intentions of or hope of buying a place, but they often, because they are still working, they don't have access to low and very low income, but they miss out on so many things. They're still working, they're almost invisible. They're men and women. It's a real problem in our industry, and we've got 3,500 people responded like that to a survey.
It's so important, Rita, and I'm actually planning to reach out to you to talk about this very issue. And I've met with Mark Murray from Unions New South Wales, Jared Henderson from the AGU. I've met with the USU, and I'm talking to the PSA about this as well. This is something that is impacting all key workers across New South Wales. We do not have a definition of key worker. We do not have targets or inclusionary zoning plans for key worker housing, and we have to have a policy setting for that. We need to know how much a nurse can afford to pay to live near the hospital that they are working, so they are not travelling 90 minutes to get to work, and that has risks for their own health, safety, and well-being. So I'd actually like to see, and this is a proposal you're putting forward to different unions and to the government, that we actually establish a select committee in the New South Wales Parliament solely on key worker housing that looks at what should be our target for key worker housing, how should we define key worker housing, and where are the priority areas to provide it. Because St Vincent's is in my electorate. A nurse can't afford to live anywhere near that hospital.
And I met with Anna Thornton in the past, the Director of Nursing. It's a terrible problem for recruitment and retention.
Absolutely.
They'll take the first nurses, early career nurses might be in a house share there. Once they become expert practitioners, they don't want to be in a house share and they can't live there. So the
hospital also has cleaners.
Yep.
I think of Plunkett Street Primary down at Waterloo. There's no way a teacher at Plunkett Street can live anywhere near that school. And we risk our global city reputation if we do not provide key worker housing, and we do not make that.
And they're all key, it's workers in key industries, because of course, if a nurse or a midwife can't afford it, what chance is a secretary or a cleaner or somebody working in?
And also, you know, between work and travelling to work, people should be entitled to have a bit of a life. But for a lot of key workers, that's just not an option. You're working and you're going to work.
You're not sitting at a computer.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for more questions, but I believe let me see your name. Annie will be staying during the break and can pick up any extra questions that missed out.
Awesome.
So
Thank you
so much,
everyone.
Alex.
Thank you for your
I'm trying to click the slide that's where we're at. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Trina Jones. Trina Jones is the inaugural Rental Commissioner for New South Wales, and she was appointed by the New South Wales Government in July 2023. Trina is a voice for renters and is working to drive change for a fair, quality and affordable renting experience in New South Wales. And given the high number of older people who are living in rentals in New South Wales, it's really fantastic that this role exists. Trina has more than 15 years' experience in leading responses to complex social issues, including housing affordability, homelessness, community safety, food insecurity, drug and alcohol use in Australia, the UK and Ireland. Trina's leadership positions as CEO of Homelessness New South Wales, Deputy Chair of Homelessness Australia, and in local government give her a deep understanding of the complex changes facing the sector. Trina seeks to work in partnership, which is great, with renters, property providers, industry experts, advocates and community leaders for greater impact, informed by those with a lived experience to help develop innovative solutions resulting in lasting systemic change. Welcome, Trina.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I was actually here last year in a different capacity in my role as CEO of Homelessness New South Wales, so I'm very delighted and committed to continue to be involved with this group. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land we meet on today and pay my respects to the Gadigal people and extend that respect to any Aboriginal colleagues in the room or online for today. So I just want to talk to you about 4 key areas. I wanted to give, I don't have much time, but I wanted to give a bit of a snapshot to help people understand the message required we're all on the same page. I wanted to talk about some of the challenges and the impacts. And I wanted to talk to you about how we're improving renting and what my priorities for change are right now. So when we start to think about the rental market, this is a bit of a snapshot about where we're currently at right now. Across Australia, New South Wales has the largest rental market, where it's made up of over 900,000 households and over 2 million renters. We hold about just under $2 billion of rental bonds, and those bonds change over 300,000 times a year. So we've got quite a dynamic market, people moving in and out all the time. We estimate we've got about 620,000 landlords, and we don't know much about our landlords. In fact, the only information we can get is from tax information, and this is something that puts us behind other countries and jurisdictions in the world. Most leases are for about 12 months or sometimes less. The average lease, when we look at the market in New South Wales, is 1.6 years, and we get this from the bond data that tells us how long a person's been in that property. This is a very short amount of time when you think about the fact that more people are renting, they're renting for longer, and many of them will rent for their whole lives. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We'll start to think they're only in that home for 1.6 years. The other thing that's, I think, unique to the New South Wales market and quite unique to Australia is that most property providers don't keep their rental homes in the market for very long. So when you start to look at the Sydney market, for example, we don't tend to see the same rental homes on the market for more than 5 years. So landlords tend to just keep the property on the market for up to 5 years, and at the same time we've got tenants moving every year and a half, thereabouts. Now it's important to know that in 70% of cases, the tenants are the ones that end the lease from the information that we have. but in 30% of cases it's ended by the landlord, and this can really undermine people's rights, and I'll talk to that in a moment as well. Some other insights: there's a strong government agenda to build up, not out. When we build up, we generally have strata schemes, and many of you may be familiar with those. While some work exceptionally well, others have many challenges. And one thing that you may not be aware of is there's 89,000 strata schemes at present. And within those strata schemes, 50% of the people who live in those homes are renters. And so their rights can be further difficult to navigate, but also they can have feelings of being undermined by the broader strata challenges that are present in their building, or not being able to fully engage in that. This is something that we're very aware of, and we do have a strata roundtable that I'm working closely with the strata commissioner on. Many of the people in this room are actually on that roundtable as well. When we start to think about our rental market, and I'll talk to some of these issues, we can't go without saying that Greater Sydney is now the equal least affordable capital city in Australia. And we know that there are significant affordability challenges across the state. At the same time, New South Wales has very low vacancy rates. We're also leading the market for new investor lending. So even though our vacancy rates are very low, New South Wales actually has the most people investing in the residential rental market. But what we're really seeing is kind of one in, one out. So we're not getting any growth, and supply contributes to that as well. So we start to think about, that's our market, but who is living in the rental market? Who's in the rental market? And specifically for this group today, I wanted to talk about renters that are over 60. In 2021, 11% of all renters were 60 plus. 37% of renters over 60 were single people, followed by couples at 27%. Between 2016 and 2021, there was a 19% increase in renters over 60 years of age. So that's about 48,000 people more who are over 60. And this is important for many of the things that are being discussed today, and in particular, for a single pensioner, all of Sydney is considered extremely unaffordable, paying 60% or more of your income on rent. And for the rest of New South Wales, it's severely unaffordable. And this is 38% to 60% of income on rent. And of course, this is from the SGS economics work that I know Shelter and others are involved in, and also from ABS data if people are interested to find out where that's from. So this presents a bit of a stark insight into some of the challenges that are in the market. Now, while I don't have time today, I do want to touch on the fact that this is a crisis. We're in a rental crisis right now, and people are asking, well, why is there a rental crisis? There's a number of factors. There's a few short-term factors. We've had a decline in the average household size from late 2020. Most people through COVID wanted to live on their own. They didn't want to share a house. They wanted the extra bedroom, to work from home. Seeing that really change now, and more people are moving into share housing, and that profile is changing. But I wanted to explain why we are where we are today. We also had a rapid increase in population from late 2022, and the temporary investment shock as interest rates rose between May 2022 and February 2023 saw a lot of rental properties sold. These are not the only reason. It's not like the market was in really great shape and then these few factors tipped it over the edge. We've had some long-standing challenges that are decades in the making. One being our residential construction rates and our supply rates in terms of overall supply haven't been delivering on the type and availability of supply that we need. And an increasingly important aspect of this is we have significantly declining social housing stock, and that's been decades of declining social housing stock. And this undermines the private rental market. These things are not separate, they're very related in this ecosystem. So I want to talk to you about a couple of the challenges, and it's not to overly prosecute the problem, but it is so that we're all on the same page. Right now, there's simply more demand for housing than there are houses. Simple as that. You can look at lots of different charts. But right now, there's more people want to rent than houses are available. And the graphs that are displayed here show that where a person applies for a house, how many of those houses are available versus how many people are going for that one house. And you can see in Sydney and in the capital cities and the regional areas where the listings are very high per property, and that means this increased competition. We also know that renters have limited choice and control with limited security of tenure, and this affects their ability to assert their rights under the law. How this is often described to me is, I don't want to poke the sleeping lion, right? Renters describe this to me as, I'm not going to say anything about the oven on the brink, or I'm not going to say anything about the windows that won't open, or in some circumstances, the windows with no glass. That is a genuine example that was given to me. Because I don't want to be back in the queues on Saturday morning with 100 other people trying to find a property with low vacancy rates that I can't really afford. So it's a very real stress for people. And what that means is that they're constantly feeling like they can't assert their rights, which they have within the Residential Tenancies Act, because they're afraid they'll be issued with no grounds eviction. Now, we run an end of tenancy survey every year. It's a pretty good survey. We've had over 55,000 responses since we set the survey up. It does represent only a 13% response rate, which is still pretty good for the volume of people. But we can see from that survey that you could infer from that survey that there's a no grounds eviction issued every 18 minutes. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Sometimes no grounds evictions are just issued procedurally. They're the thing that landlords and property managers do to end a tenancy at the end of a fixed term. They might be moving back in. They might actually be renovating. They might be selling the property, but they'll just issue a no grounds eviction because procedurally, that's what people do at the end of a fixed term. There's also more often reasons that people might do it around rent increases or trying to take advantages in the market around displacing tenants and trying to secure tenants at a higher rate. We know that that practice occurs as well. But fundamentally, what renters tell me is that we actually just want to know why we have to leave the property so we can understand what's going on. And also, so that the landlord requires a reason to end the tenancy will mean that if there's an issue in the home that I live in, I can raise that issue. And they can't put me out of my tenancy unless there's a valid reason. And we're all adults and we can navigate that as needed. So this is just about rebalancing that respect. And that's why that reform is a critical piece of work that's underway. We also know that renters have limited choice and control over how they access and live in their houses. And what it really means to live in houses is your home. The only part of living in your home is being able to have a pet. And for older renters, this is a significant issue. A survey that was done last year found that 7 in 10 renters over 50 with a pet find it difficult to find suitable housing to live in, compared to just 34% of homeowners. We also know that 72% of homeowners have a pet, compared to 36% of renters. Now, renters are 1/3 of the residents in New South Wales, and because of their tenure type, they're locked out from being able to have an animal. And they've reported that landlord restrictions are the 3rd highest barrier to pet ownership. Why is that important? Because pets keep you healthy, they keep you physically healthy, they keep you mentally healthy, and they also enable you to enjoy the relaxing comfort of your home with some company. And why shouldn't everyone have access to that? So as part of these challenges that renters are trying to navigate, it's also difficult to understand your rights and your responsibilities. And people don't really understand what's allowed and what's not allowed. And I hear this from property providers too, to be honest. There's a lot of misconception out there about what's allowed. So where I work in fair trading in the Department of Communities, of Customer Service, we get about 144,000 tenancy calls a year. So we get a lot of calls here, people asking us, how can you help me with this? There's an issue with this. And most of our calls are from tenants. We also fund tenancy support programs, about $28.7 million a year. So we fund things like no interest loan schemes, we fund the Tenants Union, that funds the Tenants Advocacy Advice Network, and we fund older persons support services as well in New South Wales to help people navigate retirement villages and other land lease community renting arrangements, which are a bit more complex. And so all of that effort goes into supporting people because it's difficult to understand what your rights are and how to navigate those rights. We also know that of those issues that are brought forward, about over 40,000 tenancy applications go to NCAP and did go to NCAP last year. That's actually up 8%. Now, NCAP is a dispute resolution service and it's a tribunal process, but it locks a lot of people out because people feel like it's like court and they don't want to go there. And particular cultural backgrounds, the administration that's required with NCAP, actually shut NCAD out for a lot of people, and so they don't feel like they can get their matters resolved. When I look at who complains to us, so I say, right, we get 144,000 calls and contacts. Who's contacting us? Mostly tenants. And then I look at NCAD and I say, all right, their matters are up 8%. Is that our tenants? Is that people coming through? No, it's landlords. So tenants reach out for support, but landlords take tenants to NCAD.
Wow.
So there's not a good balance, right, between what's going on in the rental market right now. And there's legitimate reasons, of course there are always, but there's a bit of an imbalance there. Also, NCAD can have long wait times, and if people are issued with a no grounds eviction, you know, that's cutting in a significant amount of time for them in terms of finding a new home. So how can we improve these challenges in New South Wales? And that's really where my job comes in. As the inaugural rental commissioner, I have a mandate for change. The first is around improving renting laws and regulation to make renting fair. It's not enough to just have the laws written on paper and say, oh, job done, great. We actually have to make sure that we can enforce those laws and educate around those laws so that people can do the right thing in the first place, and if they don't do the right thing, that there are genuine consequences for that to prevent further non-compliance. I'm focused on ensuring that people have decent and safe standard of housing, and that means that your home is safe to live in and it's a decent home. We start to talk about decency, we're thinking about energy efficiencies. I talk to renter advocacy groups around cold and costly and sweaty and stressed. We've seen the weather and the implications of what that can be like in the conditions of people's homes. So I'm working with my colleagues across government to make sure that we can work towards minimum energy efficiency standards in residential dwellings. I'm also very committed to ensuring that we can share data, and I'm 6 months in the role and I'll continue to be a champion and advocate for this, because when you know better, you can do better. And making that data available to everybody, lots of different insights and different data can mean that all of us can collectively improve our services and our responses and the work that we do. My role is also focused on increasing rental supply and the affordability of rental supply. And so I'm working with all levels of government to do that. And I'm also working on improving or developing and implementing a portable bond scheme. When we think about improving rental supply, it's not just about more housing, it's the type of housing that's delivered. And if you want to see affordability in the private rental market, you need to have more social and affordable housing, and the government's very committed to an agenda around increasing housing supply, but also recognising we need to have diverse supply. Now, my area of reform is focused on the rental market right now, and that's ending no grounds eviction, making it easier for renters to have pets, protecting tenants' personal information. This is about how much information are you asked for when you go to rent a property, and what happens to that information. And also introducing a portable bond scheme. So what's a portable bond scheme? Right now, when you pay your bond, that money's locked away until you end that tenancy. There's a claim on the bond, you have to go back and forth until that matter is resolved. A portable bond will enable you to say, okay, I'm moving into a new property, and instead of having to raise another $1,500 or $2,000, I can use the money I have in my bond account and I'll just pop it over to the new property. So if there's more money that's needed on that bond, I can add to it, but I don't have to raise those two bonds, if you like, to actually secure that property. So it'll be a cash flow measure for renters and a significant cost of living relief measure as well. So to help us to do these reforms, we have to make sure that we can get it right in New South Wales for the New South Wales market context. So the first thing we did was we went out to talk to people. We had record-breaking consultation with over 16,000 survey responses and over 400 long form submissions. Now, in addition to that, I went out and spoke to just over 65 organisations, and some of them are reflected in the graph there. And that's because it's not enough to just say, well, give us your kind of polling survey questions or give us your individual submissions. It's also important that we bring diverse groups together and people start to understand the different perspectives that are in the market. I also held dedicated roundtables with renters and landlords who are not represented by professional groups, just to understand where they were coming from. And thank you to Dinny and the group, and I was able to speak to older renters as well as part of that engagement. What I did notice from that was, and here's the survey results, I mean, this is tiny, so let me just talk to this. what I did notice was when we did the have your say, if renters wanted change and the landlord respondents didn't, okay? That wasn't much different across every question that we asked. So what we saw there was there are diverse perspectives on this reform agenda. When I did get to actually go out and speak to people, when I got to bring people together in groups, I found that this was much more nuanced. Sometimes when we do these consultations, people are quite, they can put forward quite polarised views. When you actually bring people together in a room, I think what we get is the sum of the parts is greater than the individuals, right? While we didn't get consensus, and I don't claim to be able to get consensus on these issues because I don't necessarily think that's possible, what I do believe is that we've got broad acceptance of why these changes need to happen, how important they'll be, and what will be needed in New South Wales to make them effective. And so where we had far from agreement, I think that what we've got is we're closer to acceptance, and I think we've also got bridges building between different groups about people understanding the different perspectives that are being brought to the table. What was very interesting through this work was the renter landlord, so the rent vestor, if you sometimes hear, they were actually right in the middle all the time. It was actually quite interesting to see. Like you had renters on one side, landlords on one side, and actually the renter landlord is an interesting group to talk to because they're experiencing the rental market. They're often a homeowner in a house they can't maybe afford to live in, so they're renting it out, and they have a unique perspective on some of the challenges and some innovative ideas brought forward about how they might be responded to from both perspectives. So I've shared some of the challenges, I've shared some of the work that we're doing right now. I suppose the key message for this group is we have a significant challenge in our rental market right now. We know that these challenges are not going away anytime soon. While we've seen price pressures, we've seen pressures around rights and responsibilities, and we've seen people really calling for change. That's what my role is in place to do. So I'm focused on making sure that we can get these reforms over the line. In addition to these renter reforms, there's work underway more broadly to continue to engage with renters and experts and property providers to make sure that even after these reforms are in place, we implement them well and we continue to work on improvements in the rental market. So I welcome your questions and your feedback. Thank you.
We have quite a few questions online and quite a few questions from the room, so we might start with in the room and then go to online and then in the room. Go first. Yep.
Hi Trina, you know me, but for those that don't, I'm Charmaine Jones with the Homeless Persons Legal Service. My question is 1.9 billion in rental bonds. I used to sit on the rental bond board and I was always frustrated at what that interest that was accrued from that bond money was spent on. I didn't ever think it was quite tenant focused enough, and the mandate is that it is supposed to help renters. Have you guys given any more thought to how to focus that money better than paying for the people in the Mascot Towers to live somewhere until their towers get fixed?
I hear that. I think that one of the things that the rental bond interest account, as you rightly pointed out, is legislated to provide support for tenancy, but also regulation more broadly. So the board is looking at ways to have more of a strategy and an action plan around what that money can be used for and what would be allocated for. Right now, that money pays for the tenancy support, so that just shy of 29 million a year is paid for from the interest account. And it also funds affordable housing programs through DCJ. So that's what the bulk of the money is being used for right now, as well as this kind of appropriations for fair trading as part of the NCAP process. So some of the money goes to NCAP to pay for that, some of the money goes to tenancy support, and some of the money goes to affordable housing. But there is a grant funded to support the Mascot Towers residents to, I think, June this year.
I might just go quickly to a question online before the Minister joins us. You mentioned that only 30% of leases were ended by tenants. There's some questions in here around passive methods.
The other way, 30% are ended, 70% are ended by tenants.
Yes, sorry. People are wondering about multitude of passive strategies that landlords might employ to force tenants out. For example, if the rent goes up and tenants can't afford it and they leave, how is that counted, and is there any way of capturing that?
So the end of tenancy survey is our best tool right now to capture why a tenancy has ended. So in your networks, can you please encourage your participants, your residents, or whoever you're working with to do the end of tenancy survey? You normally do it at the end of when you get the bond back, so it comes automatically. That's our best insight right now. But we also have other engagements with renters and we ask them about that. One of the packages of reform that we're working on right now includes closing the loopholes around rent increases. So you can't increase the rent by more than once every 12 months. And so we're really focused on making sure that those protections are in place so tenants know where they are. And also that alongside no grounds eviction would reduce I suppose you talked about the more subtle ways that the market can be manipulated, like we've seen in Queensland, where it's 6-month leases or whatever, and then rents are increased. So we're certainly working towards a model that would work well to protect renters' rights, but also can provide certainty for landlords so they know when can I increase the rent, under what circumstances can I end a tenancy, and they can also have certainty as part of the process.
Dom, did you want to go next?
Thanks. Dom Schuster from Uniting New South Wales ACT. So we're rolling out a rental model for retirement living for older people, and we're looking to try and put in place rental agreements that better suit that cohort and give them the certainty that they need. Is there scope to work with Skimishing to come up with more nuanced rental agreements for different cohorts?
Look, I think that's really interesting and a good insight into some of the different types of and how people see themselves in retirement villages. Do they see themselves as renters, or how do they perceive themselves, and what does that mean for people in real life? So I would be very open to that, and I know the policy team would be interested in that as well. So maybe Dom, we could meet and have a chat about what that looks like and what some of the constraints are in the Residential Tenancies Act, and if there's any opportunities for improvement.
That would be great. Thanks.
We welcome that. Thank you.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but what we can do in terms of the questions that haven't been answered is that we can collect all of the ones that have been put in the chat online, and if people want to email myself or Ginny with their questions, we can then forward them to you.
Yeah, absolutely, that's fine. Yeah, I saw there was like 21, so yeah. I welcome them.
Thank you so much. That was really great. I'd now like to introduce Minister Rose Jackson, who is probably well known to many of members of the Ageing on the Edge Forum. She has supported us from the very beginning. Thank you. So Rose Jackson is the Labor member for the New South Wales Legislative Council and Minister for Health, Housing, Homelessness, Youth, Water and the North Coast. Put your hand full there, Rose. Rose was elected to the Legislative Council in May 2019 and has begun fighting for real action on climate change, tackling homelessness and housing affordability. Rose has held a variety of roles within the Labor and Union movement, including Assistant Secretary of New South Wales Labor and as an official for United Voice. Rose lives in Rockdale with her family and is passionate about making our society fair for everyone. So we're very excited to have you join us. Welcome, Rose.
Thanks so much, everyone. My name's Rose. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect and acknowledgement to any Aboriginal people joining us for this conversation. So as has been mentioned, my name's Rose and I'm the Minister for all of those things, but particularly relevant for today's conversation, I'm the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. So I think probably what I'll do is just make a few brief introductory remarks, but then very keen to move into Q&A, answer any questions you have, but also just hear your feedback. One of the reasons that I like to make time for these forums and these opportunities is the chance to meet, interact with and hear from people who are doing the incredibly important and difficult work of service provision and representing organisations on the front line. So if there's something that you think I need to hear, if there's something that you want to make sure you get my ear about, you don't need to phrase it in the form of a question. You can just make sure that you're using the opportunity to put it on my agenda. So there's good news and there's bad news in terms of I should rephrase it. There's good news and there's wait and see news in terms of the work that I know Housing for the Aged Action Group has been doing for a long time on the home at last model. So we should just be upfront at first. I obviously know the model. I really want to thank Dinny and the team and everyone for their ongoing advocacy for it. I was involved in the parliamentary inquiry into older persons homelessness, which recommended the model. I really see the value of targeted early intervention and prevention for and targeted for cohorts that particularly need it and shaped in a way that is sensitive to their particular needs. And I think that that's what that model delivers. So I don't have an announcement today that it's in the budget, get that over and done with, but that's only because I'm not giving away any budget secrets. Sorry, team. We are right in the middle of the work at the moment, and so there's a range of things in the budget. I mean, I'm sure that I know that you want to see that in the budget. I know you want to see more in the budget, and I do too. And, we are looking not just at that model. I should be clear. We're looking at what we can do to fund building more social housing broadly. We're looking at what we can do to deliver more service support to homeless organisations more broadly. We're looking at what we can do to intervene in youth homelessness. I know that this group has a particular passion and agenda for older people's homelessness, but that, you as an act of love and solidarity, care about what happens in the youth space as well. And we do want to make sure that there's some targeted interventions for them. So all of that is on the cards and in the mix. And, I just send you the message that I recognise the value of those kinds of models, and we are right in the process of making the case about why that needs to be funded with our Treasury colleagues. And of course, as I always have done and will continue to do, anything that we can do together to raise the profile of these issues broadly within government, and I know that there have been some opportunities to meet with the Treasurer and others, and I just, of course, continue to, suggest that it's always useful. There's a little bit of here Rose comes with a sort of, agenda again, so as much as we can all do together is always valuable. But so I guess I just wanted to say that openly and upfront, that that's the process that we're in now. And I ask that you come with us on the journey of working through the budget and trust that this is a government that is willing to do the right thing. And I'm not just asking for that trust in a baseless way. I feel like we've already made some decisions that hopefully have earned some trust and that demonstrate that, we're not just talk. And the examples I'll obviously give are the changes that we've made to temporary accommodation, trying to make that model a little bit more functional and stable for people. There's clearly more work that needs to be done on TA, but one of the things that we've already done is to try and make TA a better solution for people, removing the day caps, removing the income limits entirely for women and children leaving domestic violence, removing the rent seeker diaries. So, those are examples of things we've already done. The creation of Homes New South Wales, again, just an example of, I ask that, you work with us as a government that's willing to do the right thing, because, we've shown that we're committed to doing that, and now we've done it. And one of the things that I did want to do on behalf of the new CEO, Rebecca Pinkston, who may be known to some of you in this room, she's come from the community housing sector, previously from government, is make sure that I extend an invitation for you and the representatives of your organisations to really working closely with her. She's indicated that that is a relationship that, she'd like to develop on her own, because, look, I as people may know, I care very passionately about my housing and homelessness portfolios, but I do have a couple of these other things I do occasionally need to work on. And Rebecca's job every day over at Homes New South Wales is to implement the agenda that we have in housing. And so a relationship with her and a direct dialogue into Homes New South Wales, I think, is going to be very valuable. You always have my ear. I will always be available, to come and talk or chat on the phone or meet with you. But day to day, decision by decision, Rebecca is going to be a key contact in terms of implementing some of the things that we talk about. So I really want to make sure that I extend that invitation to connect you with her on behalf of the New South Wales government. And I think you'll find her to be someone who also shares the kind of values and approach that we all do. So we'll probably just leave my opening remarks there, and happy now to answer any questions or just receive any feedback.
Wow, look at those hands go up immediately. You want to go first?
Thank you very much. It's absolutely wonderful to see you. May I call you Rose?
Yes, of course.
Lovely Rose. Your government have definitely earned the trust for the changes you made. I'm going to say something very motherhood statement now because I just turned 80.
Yes, Elsa, is it your birthday today, Eunice? Is this the day? Yes, today. My daughter's birthday's tomorrow, and so we.
Thank you very much. And I think you bring to this forum and many other forums that I was privileged to attend such a breath of fresh air. I have never heard a minister would actually do an introduction of his or her, CEO, and inviting us to talk to Rebecca Pinkston. I've known Rebecca Pinkston for more than 20 decades. So I strongly support the minister and I validate the Minister Jackson's invitation to us. But what I really want to say, that motherhood statement is this, Rose. This is not just Rose Jackson's portfolio. This is really across the whole of government, from the lens of all the governments, to see whatever budget they put in, are they thinking about housing is people's right? And would you leave your mother out in the park, in the car, and at the risk of being abused and being killed? So my motherhood statement for you to bring back to your colleagues is, this is the time for the Labour government to really walk the talk, deliver holistic, no pillars in between, work together. Thank you.
Happy birthday, and I take on that call for whole of government responses, and I do think certainly historically and even now, of course, there's a tendency, I think even with some of the clusters of portfolios I have, to sort of see these issues as we sort of put them over at the side and we give them to Rose and she cares about them, and that's fine, of course I do, but your call to ensure that the whole government cares about them is a very valid one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we go, I just might do a question from online.
Of course,
okay?
no,
Yep.
absolutely.
So I didn't catch the name of this person, but there's a question about the adoption of the National Construction Code's accessibility standards, talking about how it will make a difference in addressing the housing shortage, which is currently impacting people living with a physical disability, and make sure that there's better flexibility in New South Wales housing stock to meet the needs of an ageing population. Wondering if the New South Wales government has a time frame for making a decision about that, and if not, what is going to be done to address the accessible housing needs?
Yeah. Well, I'll have to check. People may be aware that the responsibility for the adoption of those codes broadly sits with my colleague Analak Chanthapong. I'll have to check in with him on timing, but I'm happy to pass that back. I've been open with the fact that I'm supportive of that work, and in terms of the housing that we build, New South Wales government housing, it's all at that level. So we're not building any homes ourselves that are not meeting those accessibility standards. Now, that's not good enough. I appreciate that that doesn't capture homes being delivered, in the private market, and I will check in with Analak in terms of those timetables. But, I see it in our housing stock too, that we need to make sure that we're building for the future and that is part of that work. And I'm actually meeting with People with Disabilities Australia next week as part of their pre-budget submission, so that dialogue between those particular groups and government is well established.
Great.
Hi Rose, I'm Jane Bullen from the Women's Electoral Lobby. Thanks so much for coming to talk with us, and we do appreciate the work that your government's been doing so far around housing and homelessness. I do, however, want to raise the Home at Last model again with you. I appreciate you saying we should be a bit patient and you're working on it. The issue, I guess, that I want to raise is that we've been patient for a long time, and we're not being patient on behalf of ourselves, but on behalf of older people who are experiencing homelessness. And as we were all talking about a little earlier in this meeting, older people can't wait. Their need is very urgent. And as we also all know, older people are in a particularly unique situation in trying to deal with the situation, housing problems that befall them. So I guess what I would like to ask you, I know you can't say what you're going to do, but is there anything that we can do to ensure that a positive response might come this time? And that the wait might be over?
No, I understand. And, I'm just extremely sympathetic. I know that it's hard, and that's why I wanted to make sure that I premised my comments on a bedrock of demonstrating that it's not just sort of, we'll see, that we are willing to make changes. Look, it's in some ways it's not complicated. I'm supportive of the model. I hear everything that you say, and I'm happy to hear
even that expensive.
That's right. I'm happy to hear other feedback and stories about people's own perspective of why it's so important. But I do recognise that we don't have unallocated money within the budget at the moment. Otherwise, I'd just say, we'll take this money that we're not spending over here and spend it on that. Unfortunately, we don't have that. and that's because people in here may work with specialist homelessness services. They're shockingly underfunded too. Many of them have demand 20, 30, 40% more than they're funded for. We don't have enough money to build the social housing. So, of course, there's lots of pressures. All that means is I don't have the money within my current bucket to do it. What I need is a little bit more money to put into my bucket, and those are decisions made collectively by government. And so what can you do? Well, any opportunity that you have, and as I said, I know this is happening, to talk to the Treasurer, the Finance Minister, the Premier, other senior representatives of government who sit on decision-making bodies about why you think that this is so important is really useful. And again, I know that it's hard because you invite them to forums, they don't come. You ask for meetings, they say, talk to Rose. I know that's what happened. And then you come and talk to me and I say, anyway, that's government, we're frustrating. But that's the honest answer is, I say, put the money in my bucket to do this thing that's really important. And, hearing the stories is useful because it gives me the language to talk to them in those meetings about why it's really important. But yes, anyone who has any opportunity to have an engagement, with those others, please, I encourage you to raise it with them. And I do know that you've had Alex Greenwich here earlier, and I just, look, Alex and I, work incredibly well together. He has been a fantastic advocate. He's doing that. So, I know that he is going out on your behalf as well and talking to those people. So some of that is happening, but any of that is useful.
Here as well.
Hi Rose. Sorry everybody, my name is Jemima. I'm from the Tenants Union New South Wales. Firstly, I want to say we've worked so well together. I think you've been a real champion for changing rental laws for a very long time. I've got some very good news too. I'm not going to ask you about budget. But what I did want to put on the table is that when Alex was here earlier, a colleague from Vision Australia asked about no grants rental reform. And I appreciate that is Mr. Tanthapong's portfolio, but it's something I know that you've passionately worked on seeing changes in the rental space for a very long time. We also had Trina, the rental commissioner, speak just before you, and she talked through some of the changes that are on the table, and no grants was one that they are progressing. So I suppose I wanted to put before you the fact that I think a lot of us in this room are looking at that rental reform. It's something that we know will have a big impact for renters generally, but for people who are older in the rental market, especially at that moment when you get forced from your home and you're having to look for a new home at the moment. We know that as an older person, it's harder to find homes because they aren't as accessible, because it's tricky to find them in your local community at the price that you want. And it's so hard. You do face discrimination as an older renter because of income, because you're not going to be working for as long, for so many different reasons. So we know that if we can reduce unnecessary evictions, we're actually going to be helping older people a whole lot in the private rental market. And and most people, moving is so traumatic, but it's a $4,000 minimum. We did those estimates in 2022, so think about inflation since then, but $4,000 every time you move. So in some ways it speaks to budget. You'd be doing a cost of living kind of measure if you actually got these reforms through. My question, I suppose, is do you have a sense of, there's a commitment from your government to get law reform through. We know Trina's working on it, but is there a time frame around which we're going to see reforms brought to the table? And are your colleagues hearing, I suppose, the message from all of us in this room, that we need these reforms done as a priority, but we also need them done well?
Yeah, thank you, Jemima, and of course the Tenants Union have been such wonderful advocates. In terms of timeframes, look, I would say that that's something that we're going to do in 2024. I can't say, yes, it's going to be introduced in the next sitting period or not. I don't have that level of detail, but we have given a commitment to do it. So that is something we will do. I would say, yes, it's not my portfolio. I do just insist on muscling in on the basis that that's right. There is a direct link between the current no grounds evictions framework that we have and homelessness. And if and when we get the Home at Last model up and running, if we haven't fixed no grounds evictions, hopefully we will, the queue of people seeking assistance for that service because they are subject to a no grounds evictions will be massive. Like that link is very clear to me. Hopefully we can do both so that we're able to provide more surety. Look, I do think, and it's hard because I'm saying be an advocate for this, being an advocate for that, but I do worry a little bit sometimes that maybe my colleagues don't have as much line of sight on some of the challenges that you've raised. It's, as I said, you try and talk to them and they say talk to Rose and, and then we're sort of back in this cycle. But I have to say, to me, it's so clear what we need to do. The commitment has been given. I know we need to deliver on it. I don't know if that's as well understood in terms of the urgency across government. I think they support it. I think they, know it's a commitment that we've given. That's all fine. It's more just that, in a busy legislative program, how do we ensure that urgent reform gets the emphasis that it needs? And I think we do need to lift a little bit, and that's on me too. As I said, I would never say that to sort of try and make excuses or put something on the unbelievably hardworking people in this room that I'm not putting on myself. I take that responsibility to muscle in on it very seriously too, but that's my honest feedback, that we need to emphasise, great, okay, the commitment's been given, actually it needs to happen, and that needs to move up the priority list.
Do you want to do the online one?
You go first, yeah.
This is really quick. I just wanted to have everyone say it out loud. Circling back to the no grounds eviction, you said there was a commitment. There was a commitment to ending it for rolling leases and also fixed term leases. And we're really worried, we're hearing that there's some walking back from the bringing it in for one and not for the other. And so we'd just like to make sure that that is said out loud, that the commitment to ending no grounds eviction covers all leases. Just
understood.
That was a nice one. Yes. Is it okay, Yumi, but just a question from Yumi. This is from Yumi Lee, this is from the Older Women's Network. She says, thank you, Minister, for your great intentions and passion for improving housing outcomes, especially for those who are homeless. When can we lower the age for priority housing for older women, which currently stands at 80? Why should older women still have to keep waiting for housing at a time when their health is more vulnerable?
Yeah. My only, that's something that I suspect would be really worth teasing out with Rebecca. My only issue with that, of course I accept, 80s, not far too old. My only issue with that is we've currently seen in the last year alone, maybe it's the last 24 months, a 16% increase in the number of people on the priority housing waiting list. So that waiting list, even without that change, is growing rapidly. That's also affecting, because the stock isn't rolling along the amount of time that people are waiting on the priority housing waiting list, that's also increasing. So unless we do the work, which I know we have to do, to build more stock, that change in and of itself is just going to mean that there's more people on the priority waiting list. And look, that may be in the shorter term the way that we have to manage it. But to me, that's the challenge, is that the list is important that we are prioritising people with need. And of course I accept that there are 60, 65, 70, 75-year-old older women who have a massive need. Of course I accept that. But what we really need for everyone is stock. And so, you know, those things go hand in hand. But as I said, I think one of the things that'd be great to talk about with Rebecca is how you might do those things in tandem, so that, you know, the priority waiting list doesn't become so big as to sort of, to be honest, people lose priority within it. You know, we don't want it I mean, the general waiting list is an embarrassment, it's a disaster. We don't want the priority waiting list to turn into that. And, you know, I mean, obviously, generally we just need to lift stock to resolve that. But just briefly on that, one of the other things that I have been asking Homes New South Wales to do, and again, we'll be working with Rebecca on, is just on the list. I'm very concerned and frustrated about the way that the lists are managed currently, how hard it is for people to get on the list, to prove their priority status. I mean, the age is one thing, but there'd be a number of other factors for, say, women aged 60 to 80 that might qualify them for priority. But God, I mean, it's so hard, I know that. So we're looking at really stripping all of that back to make accessing the housing waiting list and having priority assessed a lot more straightforward. So that's another thing. Again, I mean, feedback from people in this group, you know, the heartbreaking stories. I remember in the parliamentary inquiry, people talking about trying to fill in the forms and get the work done and talk to people about just how challenging that was. So that's another piece of work that I've asked Rebecca to do. How could we do that better? And I think there's actually quite a bit we could do. And again, these questions of how we assess priority could be part of that work too.
Do you have time for one more? Or?
One more.
One more? Got time for one more. Did you want to have a go? Yep. Go.
I am really being indulged. Thank you very much. Minister, I had the privilege to attend a webinar last week, hosted by Shelter New South Wales. The topic is ethical housing, and that is very powerful. So ethical housing is actually not just increase the number of properties that you have been, you know, encouraging us so far, but it's actually together with it, we also provide funding for support to ensure sustainability of the tenant, because successful tenancy is successful communities, right? So that's one thing. I just pass it on to you what I learned humbly. The second thing is I just come back from Hong Kong. 12 months, 6 months lease is ha ha ha, what a laugh. They actually have lifelong leases. So together with the no ground eviction, let's think ahead of time, put on the agenda, look at elongating the lease, because in doing that, you give stability, you give security, and you allow people who can really move ahead in their life. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you on both those points. Obviously, as I said, I'm very interested in what we can do to better support tenants and you know, yeah, build, we need to build more, but, you know, yeah, we want people to have successful tenancies as well and build functional communities. So I very much recognise that it is more than just building homes. We need to do that, but all those other things. And yes, look, I agree, there is a conversation in government, pleasingly, about what we can do to encourage longer term leases. That is on the agenda, that is recognised. You know, different options and discussions about how we might achieve that, incentives and disincentives. I will say this as an aside, which of course you all know, a surefire way to incentivise shorter fixed term leases is to only apply no grounds evictions to periodic leases. There is one surefire result of that, which is rolling 6 months fixed leases. So I recognise that decision would be completely counterintuitive to the outcome. I recognise that. So these are the conversations that we're having in government to try and make sure that the rental market is more stable and secure and, you know, provides a home for people in the longer term.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for, but thank you so much. It's a real privilege to have so much time to talk with the Minister, and so we really appreciate your support and ongoing advocacy. And I'd like to just thank you again.